He should have been Joe Buck, and yet it slipped from his grasp in the most agonizing way. The naive Texan with a suitcase full of dreams and Midnight Cowboy was his, then vanished in a tangle of studio paperwork and loyalty clauses. Instead, Michael Sarrazin drifted into another American dreamscape, an airless dance hall on the Santa Monica Pier, where desperate couples scrambled for food, fame, and a few hours of sleep, with Jane Fonda for company. From the distance of decades, it's tempting to say the missed role defined him, but the truth is more complex and more revealing. Sarrazin was the right actor for a particular season in cinema, a season of drifters and dropouts, soft-spoken searchers who looked like they wandered in off the highway and never quite returned to the main road. Welcome to Hollywood Mysteries. He began a long way from Hollywood, both in geography and in culture, and he wasn't even a native English speaker. Jacques-Michel-André Sarrazin was born in Quebec City in May 1940 and raised in Montreal, the son of a prosecuting lawyer named Bernard Sarrazin and his wife Enid, née Scott. He was a French-speaking kid and a middle child between his siblings Bernard Jr. and Enid Jr. He was also a kid who tried 8 schools, including the prestigious Loyola High School, and lost interest in all of them. The institutional rhythm of bells, rules, and recitations did not take. Performing, though, did. In fact, he said it was in him from the very start. "Maybe you think I'm an egomaniac," he'd go on to say, "but I've always craved recognition and attention. I never seemed to get enough of them as a kid." He started with school plays and marionette shows, and a little revolutionary spirit when he led a campaign of students at Darcy McGee High against the Army cadet training that was compulsory in Canada at that time. At 17, he was finally done with school for good, and he decided to pursue his dream of acting. He joined the Montreal branch of the New York Actors Studio, a move which led him to being disowned by his family. So, without his father's money behind him, he turned to dishwashing and selling toys at a department store to get by while he learned his craft. He was living in an attic above a store in Montreal's Bohemian district. The beginning was very tough. "My early days in Montreal were virtually nothing," he said. He wasn't above scouring the streets of the city for discarded junk he could sell for beer money. He had given up a life of relative comfort and a beeline to a solid profession because he was that hungry for the feeling you get when the lights hit and the room goes silent. In his late teens, he made a detour to New York, where he spent a brief period at the Actors Studio, living near poverty, learning what the body can communicate when the lines are exhausted. Before he could get much out of it, he was deported back to Canada after overstaying his visa. He would later joke that he had been rail thin from malnutrition, but never thinner than his patience for anything that wasn't acting. Back in Montreal, he borrowed $50 from a friend and made a change by moving to Toronto. Here, his gangly frame and hypnotic gaze were just what directors were looking for, and he began to get some gigs as an actor. He appeared in a radio drama and on television at the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation. After there were short stints and shorter paychecks with the National Film Board, he worked with directors like Paul Almond, Eric Till, and George Bloomfield for various TV dramas. One of these stood out in particular, a production titled Romeo and Jeanette, starring another rising French-Canadian named Geneviève Bujold. Thanks to that, Hollywood noticed what Toronto already knew, although it would come via New York. A Hollywood satellite agency in the Big Apple signed him up and soon had him on his way to a movie deal. Universal offered a contract for $50,000 a year. This was during the waning days of the studio system when they still minted company men and women. Sarrazin accepted, landing in California with a frame that seemed to have been stretched by long winters, a shy smile, and a gaze that could turn oblique on command. The first jobs were the usual, a guest role here, a TV movie there. He remembered the early set days not as triumphs, but as education. "My first TV feature was with Bobby Darin," he said years later. remembering Gunfight in Abilene, a quick and dirty western shot in 2 weeks and then shelved for a year. Leslie Nielsen glowered. Darren played piano between setups, and Sarrazin watched Meng try to ride and shoot and pretend it was natural. It was work. It was also an apprenticeship in economy. Hit your mark, tell the truth, leave the rest out. Sarrazin was not impressed with this low-grade fare from Universal. There are so many insincere, insecure parasites here. A lot of them are garbage merchants. My first year here, all they wanted me to do was absolute junk. I prostituted myself by doing some TV junk. They ground out the Virginians, the Doomsday Flight. It took them 15 days to toss together a movie I was in, Gunfight at Abilene, and it was so bad they couldn't release it. There were other pressures on Michael at this time, too. In 1963 and 1965, he fathered 2 daughters, Michelle and Catherine, with an unknown woman from Montreal. His dreams were one thing, but now he had a family of sorts to care for. Then the break arrived with an old American archetype, and what a break it was. Before I get into Michael's breakout role, I'd like to show you the range of shirts now available at the Hollywood Mysteries official store. You can find a link to the store down in the description and also on screen now. All the shirts are designed in-house and are 100% exclusive to Hollywood Mysteries. You won't see these anywhere else. So if you're wearing one, it'll be something a little special. There are designs featuring stars such as Peter Lorre, Louise Brooks, Lupe Velez, and Paula Negri. Every sale is a huge help to the channel. Thank you so much to all of you who have purchased one. Now let's get back to the show. In 1967, in The Flim Flam Man, Sarrazin played the young protege to George C. Scott's silver-tongued grifter. The film is light on its feet and deeply American. 2 men on back roads selling dreams to people who don't know they're buying. And Sarrazin's Curly is the unspoiled conscience toggling between conscience and the cash box. He could do guileless without drifting into dumb. He could watch and listen in a way that draws the camera as surely as the line draws the fish. The film was also a test of character for Michael, as George C. Scott's reputation was well known through Hollywood, surly, intimidating, and with a take-no-prisoners attitude. Scott, however, took a real shine to Sarrazin. He was exceptionally generous with me. I had heard rumors that he could be very temperamental, Michael said. That he didn't suffer fools and stuff like that, but for some reason he took me under his wing and we got along really well. Whatever praise he had for Scott was not matched by his opinion on the Flim Flam Man, which he called dumb and juvenile. A year later, he turned up in 1968's The Sweet Ride, a Malibu daydream turned sour, where he co-starred with British actress Jacqueline Bisset in one of her first starring roles. She was cool and luminous. He was all offhand charm. The film brought him a Golden Globe nomination, and it also changed his life in a less public way. He and Bisset began a relationship that carried them through the turn of the decade and into the mid-1970s, a pairing of 2 young stars who tried living outside the circus tent even as it followed them everywhere. They would share the private resolve to keep the tabloids at bay even as they became some of the hottest and most interesting talents of the era. She moved into his newly purchased beach house in Malibu, which was in truth a pretty ramshackle hut. Inside, he filled the place with books on movie history and something he called his ego board, where he pinned all his positive reviews. Jacqueline took on the role of dutiful housewife, and they could open the door and walk right down to the ocean where Michael took up surfing. It was the hippie and bohemian dream come true. In fact, the late 1960s favored Sarrazin in general. He had the right look and the right temperature, not ice cold, not feverish, but a kind of steady simmer, the sense that he'd think before he spoke, and when pressed, chose flight over fight. In 1969, he found his signature role in the bleak compassion of They Shoot Horses, Don't They? Sidney Pollack's vision of a Depression-era dance marathon that turns human beings into exhausted entertainment. As Robert Siverton, Sarrazin becomes Jane Fonda's partner, the man who lends her stubborn rage an important counterweight of quiet resolve. Pollack pushed for authenticity from his cast. We stayed in character, Sarrazin recalled, Pollock said we should work until signs of exhaustion. Fights would break out among the men. Women started crying. The film cut like an exposed nerve when it was released, and it became a high watermark of new Hollywood. Smart, intense, deep, and powerfully acted. It received 9 Oscar nominations. Gig Young won for his viper's grin of a master of ceremonies. Fonda and Susanna York were recognized. Sarrazin, however, was not. He believed a 6-minute monologue explaining Robert's final terrible act might have secured a nomination had it not been excised from the final cut. But he didn't dwell on it. "You could have paid me $1 a week to work on that," he said. "It hits you bolt upright. I still get really intense when I watch it." He was drawing an outline of a certain American male for the era, the outsider whose decency complicates his drift, the draft dodger who isn't loud about it, the young man who knows he's not where he belongs and can't imagine where else he'd go. The roles kept reinforcing that map. An Eye of the Cat and A Man Called Gannon, he was the apprentice again, albeit a cat-phobic one in the former. The watcher, the guy with a foot in 2 worlds, tempted by money or skill, learning how to be a dangerous and deciding, sometimes too late, if he wants to be. He even went to Europe to chase after a fantasy in Search of Gregory, a romance constructed on absence and missed encounters that has the perverse logic of a daydream. Just when his stocks should have soared, the invisible machinery of Hollywood grabbed the wheel and sent him something truly tantalizing. The part of Joe Buck in Midnight Cowboy had been his. He had been cast, they had taken the measurement tape out for costumes, and he was ready to go to Texas. But there was an old cax from the dying studio system. Universal, which controlled his contract, refused to release him. Whether it was a loan-out fee too steep to stomach or simple intransigence, the effect was the same. The young Canadian whose natural register was the tender drifter would not play the tender drifter in the film that literally defined the type. Jon Voight took the role and became a star. It was a very disappointing moment for him because the movie was wonderful, his brother Pierre would later say. Pierre added that Voight was always gracious in acknowledging how close Sarrazin had come. In the story of a working actor, turning points rarely arrive with fanfare. They are choices made by committees in rooms the actor never enters. Decisions that close one door and slide open another to a different, less certain path. In this case, a door was slammed on Sarrazin while he was already halfway through it. Michael kept working, and he often worked with distinction. Paul Newman, the AAA actor, movie star, and by then increasingly director, cast him in Sometimes a Great Notion, Ken Kesey's story of a lumber family with their own code and a river of grief running beneath it. Sarrazin played Leland Stamper, the idealistic younger brother with hair too long for the diner and politics too soft for the logging crew. The movie needed what Sarrazin had in abundance: a listening face, the capacity to absorb blows without posturing, and the kind of decency that looks like weakness until it doesn't. In The Pursuit of Happiness, directed by Robert Mulligan, Michael was a college student charged after a fatal car accident, an anti-establishment kid who suddenly discovered that idealism has to negotiate with the law. Yet somehow he never quite broke into the highest rank of stars. He seemed to have it all in terms of talent, looks, and a persona that fit well with the times he lived in. Furthermore, he was incredibly popular with fans, partly due to the mystique that surrounded him. He simply never gave much away, refusing almost all interviews and never once appearing on a TV talk show. When he did give an interview, he was often ornery. In 1968, he pushed back against the cookie-cutter shapes being forced on him by Hollywood, saying, "It bugs the hell out of me when I'm typecast as another Jimmy Dean or young Fonda or Brando. I feel like yelling at them. Hey, you can't make a Mickey Mouse out of me. I don't want $1 zillion. I don't want to be a carbon copy star. All I want is to be me, Michael Sarrazin, maybe the best damned actor in the world. Take me on my own terms or I'll cut out." In 1971, he reunited on screen with Jacqueline for Believe in Me, a dark romance steeped in the quicksand of addiction. He played a medical student with a giant mustache hooked on meth, she a young woman who slides into drug dependency along with him. The work was serious, but the reception was mixed. John Huston's set was his next port of call, not as an auteurist chance, but as proof that the Hollywood system still recognized him. The life and times of Judge Roy Bean is a frontier fantasia with a starry cast: Paul Newman again, Anthony Perkins, Ava Gardner, and a pair of younger faces, Sarrazin and Bisset, cast as husband and wife in a tale about self-invention. Michael also kept one foot in Canada when he could, for example starring in the Ground Star Conspiracy, a chilling espionage puzzle shot on home turf. Directors learn to let him watch, because watching is a choice that builds tension. It makes the audience do the work of finishing the thought. That quality served him unusually well in a made-for-television gamble that could have been kitsch and wasn't. In 1973 in Frankenstein, The True Story, Michael played the creature as a man, beautiful first and then ruined. Some say it was heresy against the stitched and bolted canonical image of the creature, but it works because he treats the premise as an ethical problem rather than a horror gimmick, which was more in line with how Boris Karloff intended his original performance to be read. Viewers and critics took notice. It remains one of the strangest and most affecting performances in an otherwise uneven decade of genre television. He still took swings at commercial comedies. For Pete's Sake in 1974 put him opposite Barbra Streisand as her beleaguered husband, a New York cab driver handcuffed to a series of harebrained schemes she hatches to make money fast. The film's ambitions are modest and the reception was lukewarm, but the pairing is a snapshot of a career perched between lanes, the sensitive drifter drafted now into screwball and Streisand territory, asked to be exasperated rather than haunted. Meanwhile, his private life flickered in and out of the frame even as he fought to keep it private. He and Jacqueline had been living together since 1968. Friends remember her describing Michael in those years as quiet, moody, and like a wiry alley cat who circled the room before choosing a chair. By the mid-1970s, the relationship had run its course, and they parted, a fact which caused Jacqueline in particular a great deal of heartache. Her friend, gossip columnist Dorothy Manners had a rare insight into this secretive affair. She said, Jacqueline was deeply in love with him. She was then far more involved with him than she was in her own career. She and Mike lived in a shack on the beach, and I mean shack. She did the cooking, cleaning, washing, and ironing for Mike. Even when he went on film locations, Jackie would tag along to carry on the domestic chores. Mike came across as a loner, an intellectual hippie type, and something of a male chauvinist. Michael would later be linked with Margot Kidder after the two worked together on the reincarnation of Peter Proud. Again, the details were mostly private, handled with the same preference for removing his name from columns that trafficked in speculation. He seemed to love the work more than the attention the work brought him. However, in one interview, he revealed the sadness he felt after the end of his relationship to Jacqueline. In an interview he gave in his new environs, a large house in Beverly Hills had replaced the hippie fantasy shack. He spoke with eyes downcast when he said, "She deserves happiness, and all this wonderful success she is having." When the interview pressed him to reveal more about his life, Michael gave away a similar dejected sense about his career. "I jog a little, but mostly I fret. I drive my agent crazy. I watch my old movies on TV and see all the mistakes I made. I cry a lot. I'm a mess until I start to work again." This was also when the old contract world and the new freelance world rubbed against each other like ill-matched gears. Universal had launched him and also fenced him in. When the era turned toward blockbusters and high-concept pitch lines, he didn't turn with it. He remained a man at the window, watching and waiting for an opportunity to show his real talent. He might in truth have been smarter to turn his back on Hollywood and, given his mother tongue, pursued a career making art films in Paris. But he was dogged about wringing quality roles out of Hollywood, even if Hollywood was running dry on them. The question pressing Sarrazin from the far side of the decade was brutally simple. What does Hollywood do with a leading man whose essence is quiet in an era discovering how much noise it can make? The answer, at least in the following years, would be to tug him in several directions at once. For now, he had bills to pay and would have to make do with what was on offer. Lipstick in 1976 was a rape revenge drama that put him in a supporting role inside a controversial movie. The Love and Times of Scaramouche the same year cast him in a costume farce opposite Ursula Andress. Then came The Gumball Rally, a boisterous ensemble comedy about an illegal coast-to-coast race that has since turned into a cult artifact of the CB radio era. In caravans and expansive desert adventures shot in pre-revolutionary Iran, he strode through wind and sand and political complications not of the script's making. On paper, the projects vary wildly, but in each he's the same committed professional, hitting the marks. The paradox hardened. He was everywhere and somehow nowhere. After a decade of steady interest from named directors Pollock, Mulligan, Newman, and Huston, he became increasingly an actor whose presence anchored films that themselves had little presence. So many misfires, failed concepts, and production flops. Somehow Michael was the common thread, and yet it's impossible to pin the blame on him. In fact, the reasons are not mysterious and not entirely personal. The industry that had once welcomed introspective outsiders was now addicted to scale, spectacle, high-concept sequels. In other words, the things that maximized revenues. Sarrazin didn't vanish, he slid away. He worked in television miniseries like Beulah Land. He took Canadian thrillers and American programmers, some underseen, some frankly better left that way. He even hosted Saturday Night Live in 1978, where he performed a popular hockey skit with fellow Canadian Dan Aykroyd. This was another potential shot in the arm for his career that led nowhere, despite it being one of the top-rated appearances in that SNL season. Now in his 40s, he played a supportive boyfriend in The Seduction in 1982, a mildly sleazy film that made money in spite of itself and asked him mostly to look concerned on cue and slide in and out of bathtubs with blondes. Reviewers could be cruel, and their cruelty often had less to do with him than with the way a system misuses people of particular talents. It was hard for him to play depth when the surface is all the script wants. Somehow, this career of disappointment and lack of recognition of his talent didn't break him and turn him into a walking disaster. There were no arrests, no rehab confessions, no crash and burn dramas. Whenever he returned to Montreal, he was mobbed as a local hero, one of the city's most famous sons. Through the 1980s, work continued. He had his share of guest shots, and TV movies replaced prestige features. Canadian projects alternated with American ones, and the long shadow of the missed Joe Buck grew shorter by virtue of ordinary time. He took meetings, read pages, signed contracts. He learned how to survive the middle years of a public career without staging a rebellion against the fact that it was the middle. There is dignity in that, though it's rarely celebrated, because the mythology of the business prefers extremes, the comet or the crater. Sarrazin was something else, the line that continues across the page. In the early 1990s, after years of American work, his brother Pierre coaxed him back into French on a Quebecois picture, La Florida, a popular comedy about a Montreal family running a motel in Florida. Sarrazin played a louche lounge singer named Romeo Laflamme, a role that allowed him to lean into slyness without sacrificing his essential gentleness. After years of drifting in the American industry's eddies, he looked comfortable at home. He sold his California property and returned to Montreal permanently. He continued to work where he could. There was an appearance on Star Trek Deep Space Nine in 1996, a science fiction parable about a plague and a possible cure that let him play a doctor with a conscience. It was a familiar shape rendered in latex and allegory, and he fit it. He showed up on Murder, She Wrote, and similar staples, the kind of work that draws a paycheck and a polite note from a casting director and vanishes into syndication. If you loved him in They Shoot Horses or Flim Flam, you might have felt a passing warmth in seeing the name in the credits again. If you didn't know the history, you registered a face with an interesting sadness and moved on to the next commercial break. He appeared in The Christmas Choir for television in 2008, a gentle Hollywood story that let him be a decent man trying to set something right. And he said yes to a small part in On the Road, Walter Sell's adaptation of Kerouac, a cameo that kind of doubled as a private joke about drifters and decades. Sadly, the film would come out after he was gone. In his final years, he fought another quiet battle, this time an illness that he didn't advertise. The diagnosis was cancer, mesothelioma to be precise, and this would have felt like a painful irony given the likelihood that it would have been caused by his working environment. Not only were the sets, the work sites, and the shabby apartments ignoring him, they had also been silently and diligently killing him with the asbestos in their walls. Just like Steve McQueen, who died from the same illness, this lethally banal material respected no fame or authority. He remained according to his family himself. His daughter Catherine remembered him even using his walker and wheelchair as props for skits, wringing comedy from the indignities, somehow able to throw together a kind of bedside vaudeville for an audience of 2. The career that had built an image of watchfulness ended with a man still trying to make his daughters laugh. It is not the Hollywood ending people script when they picture fame. It is better, even if there is sadness to it. He died in Montreal in April 2011 at 70, with his daughters present and his brother nearby. The headlines tallied the essentials. They shoot horses as his keystone, Midnight Cowboy as his ghost, a decade of high visibility followed by quiet work of staying visible enough to keep working. Obituaries reached for a logic that doesn't exist, the one that accounts for why this man did not become a bigger star. The honest answer, which the smart ones hint at, is that stardom is a formula with more variables than talent and will. He had enough of the first and he had plenty of the second. The rest depended on timing, taste, champions, and nothing better than luck. There is a way to tell the story that makes it sound like a tragedy. That way is wrong. What he wanted early on, by his own account, was to be me, Michael Sarrazin, and to be taken on his own terms as he was. He worked with giants and did not embarrass himself. He was cast in one of the era's most pitiless masterpieces and gave it the exact weight it needed. He stumbled into the comic and the disposable and helped make them better than they deserved to be. There was one more small kindness the world managed for him. On the Road premiered in 2012 with his cameo intact. It is a film about restless men and the women who share their rooms, a hymn to travel that interrogates the hymn itself. The actor who embodied the American drifter in a career that both opened doors and blocked exits appears, for a beat, inside the story that instructed a generation of drifters how to dream. That's about all for this episode. I hope you enjoyed this look at an actor whose name is less well known today than maybe it could have been. I think if you were around in the late 60s, though, you might just remember the buzz about Michael at that time. And of course, if like me you watched and loved They Shoot Horses, Don't They, several decades later, you might have wondered what happened to him after that amazing performance. I hope I answered a few of those questions. If you remember Michael Sarrazin, why not leave me a comment to let me know your favorite of his performances? And be sure, as always, to like, subscribe, and share with a friend. I've been Ava. I'll see you next time. Sweet dreams.